Welcome to New Brunswick Wildlife Wonders, a program which features projects funded by New Brunswick's Wildlife Trust Fund. I'm your host, Don McPhail. For the first episode of this series, we're going to have a look at some of the creatures that spend part of the year underground. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to join two scientists from the New Brunswick Museum for a first-hand look at the consequences of white-nose syndrome on the region's bat population. We donned coveralls and strapped on headlamps, and this was our experience.
We're going to turn off right here. Okay, the entrance is just over here. As you can see, it's a pretty good size, but it narrows down quickly, so the tight spot is down at the bottom there. So I think we should be able to fit you through, Don, I think. Well, there's 7 species of bats in New Brunswick, but there are 3 that go into caves. And in this particular cave, there are 2 species that we've seen. We've seen little brown bat and northern long-eared bat. Tricolor bat, or eastern pipistrelle, is a bat that we see very rarely in some of the other caves, and it's not what we've seen in this particular cave.
And the bats that don't go into the caves, they migrate south?
Well, there are 3 of them that migrate south, just like birds, the tree bats. And there's one other one that in other parts of the range does go into caves. In southern Ontario, parts of Quebec, big brown bat goes into caves. Here, it's not a common bat, but it overwinters here in people's homes in very small numbers. We're going to get through this narrow section at the beginning, and the passage forks. We're going to go to the right. We're going to start off, we'll be crawling through here, or moving down on our backs. And then once we get in a little ways, we'll be able to move to a duck waddle, and then eventually you'll be able to stand upright. We started the work in 2009. At that point, the white-nose fungus had been in the U.S. for a couple of years, in eastern U.S. We was moving rapidly north and south. We knew that it was going to turn up here in New Brunswick, so we decided to get a jump on things and try to learn a little bit about overwintering bat populations, how many bats there were here in the province. We didn't know that, so we didn't have any baseline data to track changes in bat numbers. So I'm just going to squeeze through here. We also wanted to know something about the fungal communities that occurred on bats before the white-nose fungus arrived here. So we collected a lot of that kind of information prior to the arrival of white-nose. It turned up just as we were finishing some of our work in 2011.
It seems like we're awfully deep into the bowels of the earth here. I guess we're probably only 10 or 20 feet below ground, but might as well be in the middle of the earth.
Well, we're going to go down into this main chamber. And I've already been down and taken a quick look around, and there are 5 bats here. When we were here in the fall, there were 7. There are 5 in here at least. Several of those are showing signs of white-nose, but some of the others look like they're in pretty good shape. So with luck, maybe they'll get through the winter.
Well, I'm happy that there's still bats here. We weren't sure if we'd find any bats, so finding 5 when we found 7 in the fall was doing pretty well, I think, at this point.
And we've continued to track bat numbers. Unfortunately, they've been dropping dramatically, so we have probably less than half of 1% of our overwintering bat population still in place. There's 1 bat in here on the wall. This is a little brown bat. It looks like it's in good shape. I don't see any signs of white-nose fungus on this bat. At this point, white-nose is so widespread in these caves that the spores are all over the cave walls. So at this stage, we certainly are seeing white-nose on isolated bats as well. The cave that we went into normally would have 200 to 250 bats pre-white-nose. Since then, those numbers have continued to drop precipitously.
So we found 5 bats in the cave, and this one over here has the heaviest infection of those 5. It's got a lot of visible fungal growth on the wings of the bat, a little bit on the ears as well, not so much as on the nose. So since he has such a heavy infection this early in the winter. It's only January. He's got months left to survive hibernation without eating, so he's probably not going to survive.
This is considered one of the great wildlife tragedies of the last 100 years. There's a whole group of mammals, bats, that appear to be on the way out, that may well become locally extirpated, locally extinct. The little brown bat, which is one of the species that's being most dramatically affected, is one of the most widespread and abundant small mammals in North America, or at least was. But there are millions and millions of these bats that have died since 2006, when this disease first turned up in North America. It's the little tiny strands, the main body of the fungus, and they actually invade the tissue of the bat and grow and gain their nourishment from the bat tissue.
From the muscle tissue?
Well, not necessarily the muscle tissue, mostly from skin.
Okay.
So, yeah. They have white nose growing on them. They'll groom that off. So when people find bats flying outside, find these winter day flying bats, often they expect to see signs of white nose on a bat, but you won't see that because the bat has woken up, it's brought its body temperature up, it's groomed itself, it's cleaned up its nose, its ears, its face, its wings, and it's removed any obvious signs of the white nose fungus. Their immune system essentially shuts down. So they don't have an immune system that can combat the invasion of this fungus into the tissue. Now, if they can get through the winter and get out of here, of course the immune system kicks in, so they're able to combat the fungus that way, and of course if insects are flying, they're able to get some food as well. The fungus was introduced to North America by, we don't know precisely how, but the assumption is that it was introduced from Europe, where it occurs with bats and doesn't cause mortality. Bats and this fungus have co-evolved in Europe. It appears to have been introduced into North America by humans, by us. Once it's here in North America, it seems that the main vector are in fact bats. Nonetheless, we're still encouraging people to stay out of caves, actually all year round, if they're used by bats as overwintering hibernacula. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is because during the winter when bats are there, we want to give them as much opportunity to get through the winter successfully as we can. And if people go in, they wake bats up, they disturb them, they burn off their fat reserves, and they simply don't have the fat reserves to get through the winter. So we don't want people to go in when the bats are there. We don't want people to go in when bats are not there either, though, because the fungus, spores of this fungus are now spread throughout these caves. And we actually don't want the same thing essentially to happen in North America that happened to be North America and Europe. We have somebody picking up the fungal spores and, for example, going to BC or Alberta and moving this fungus westward. That is really the great fear. So we're asking people to stay out of caves in this area and to not risk moving that fungus around. Now the good news is that it looks like 3 of those at this stage are not showing any signs of white nose, so hopefully those will get through the winter. The other 2, not so good.
It's very impressive to come down through this narrow passageway and into here and finally be able to stand up here, but to think that there used to be 200 bats here, and the number of bats we used to see flying around the backyard all summer, and just in the course of a couple of years they've largely disappeared. And if this is where they were overwintering, you can see why we don't have them in the summer. Pretty discouraging to see, actually.
I think it's still too early to be certain what's going to happen. There have been some efforts made to try to estimate the impact of the loss of bats from ecosystems, certainly in terms of agriculture. It looks like it could cost North American agriculture, it's been estimated, some $3 or $4 billion a year in lost productivity, the increased use of pesticides. But here in New Brunswick, we don't really know what the impact is going to be. Bats feed heavily on moths and beetles. There are quite a number of moths and beetles that are forest pests, and of course we depend heavily on the forest industry. So one could speculate that it could in fact have an impact. But at this stage, we just don't know. iButton, these are a little electronic device that we're using for monitoring temperature. So we have them programmed to record temperature twice a day, every day. Well, in some cases we've had them in place for months or even years on end.
So I have to set up a new iButton. So I have to tell it how often to sample. So we sample every 12 hours. And I'm going to, we do it at 2:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. So I have to program it to have a start delay.
We're finished here. We've downloaded the I buttons. We've counted the few bats that are here, and hopefully disturbance has been minimal. Got water samples at this side of the cave, and you're going to collect some water samples on the other side, right, Karen?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll head back out. The bats are not gone yet. We're interested in trying to find out if there are any fungi that may interact with the white-nosed fungus that might be useful in trying to combat the disease. We have actually a couple of fungi that are pretty interesting, and we're continuing to work with those. We have a number of fungi that are actually unidentified, that are new species, that are undescribed, so we're working with those. So we're trying to get a better handle on how this particular fungus interacts with the other fungi in the environment around it.
I feel privileged to have got in there. It wasn't high on my list of things to do, but actually going in with two people that have been in there before, know what they're doing, that makes all the difference. To see the bats, a few of them making a go of it, but just to be in there, and I actually turned my light off for a little while too when I was there by myself, and it's real black, and you could really hear the water dripping. That was about the only sensation you had, was just hearing the water. And suddenly you could feel a little bit of air movement too.
A little bit of
airflow around there, it seems like, which I didn't notice when the lights went on.
Then you do get a sense when you turn your light off of maybe a little bit what it's like to be a bat hanging there in the winter, and you've got no idea what's going on up on the surface. You don't know what the temperature is. You don't know whether it's raining, snowing, is it spring, is it the time to leave. You don't know. The only way you know is by the amount of body fat you've got. It's an internal clock, and of course the problem for these bats is that the white nose, their internal clock is speeded up. They're burning off that body fat, and so by January, February, they're essentially starving when they come out. Dehydrated.
Do you do any activities, any sports? And how do you feel about that? I hate feeling sad too. Would you like to talk about it? And what makes you feel better? Oh, really? You like to knit? No, I do not like sardines.
Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Jean Clinton.
Tune in to Rogers TV on Sundays at 8 p.m. to watch some of the province's most talented country, gospel, and bluegrass artists perform at the Miramichi Country Music Opry. Tap your toes and sing along with new performers and musicians every week, featured with the Opry's very own Bill Mullen and the Miramichi Opry Boys. Miramichi Opry, a fan favorite, Sundays at 8 p.m., exclusively on Rogers TV.
Are you ready?
Woke up half dressed, still buzzing.
Minions!
Minions. Why wait to watch what you want? Order the hottest new release movies with the touch of a button. Go to Rogers On Demand on Channel 100 and start watching today.
Welcome back. We've left the bat cave, but our look at white nose syndrome isn't over. Next, we're going to go to the New Brunswick Museum for a first-hand look at the research that's being done on the fungus that is threatening New Brunswick's bats.
What do we got here, Karen?
So we have a whole bunch of cultures that I got from my sampling season in the caves.
So what are these? You say it's cultures, but...
Yep, so this is fungus growing on an agar plate. So this is a nutrient medium that they grow on pretty well. This species actually is quite interesting because it's a close relative of the fungus that causes white nose syndrome.
Did this one come from Europe as well, or is that a local?
I imagine this is native. We also found it before white nose syndrome came here to New Brunswick.
How do you grow these things? You take a little sample of this in the cave?
So what we do, we take a swab and sample the substrate of interest, and then we spread it on one of these agar plates, so a sort of streak on the surface, and spread that out. So there's a whole bunch of spores on the swab of a whole bunch of different species. So I have to take each species from the original plate and subculture it onto one of these plates so that it's a pure culture like this one.
Okay.
And that way we can really identify it accurately.
And this is a different species of...
That is a completely different species,
Oh, it
yeah.
looks different.
It's quite red, that one.
And this is and these are all different
These
species
are all
of
different
fungi
species.
that grow in the caves where
In
the
the
bats
cave
live.
environments, yep. They grow really well at 5 degrees, 7 degrees. They don't do so well at higher temperatures. This one is actually an undescribed species that we've been working up. That one is really interesting. It's quite common in the caves.
I have a hard time telling just...
What's what?
Well, what is the actual species there? Is this 100 different or 1,000
Nope,
different
that's
that's
one species, yep.
That's one
and they often
individual of
section
that
like
species.
That. You get a little mutation and it'll section in that, but it's still the same thing.
So that's just one individual of that species?
And that's the penicillin, something you'll see commonly on bread. I know you were asking about that
oh,
earlier.
That's penicillin. Boy, there's a lot of variety here.
Yep, and it's always interesting to look at the reverse as well, because that's also diagnostic. So it's really dark there, sort of yellowish on that one. And here we have a pink, so that's pretty interesting.
So you have the actual white nose fungus.
I got lots of it. It's
The bad fungus.
I've found it really easy to cultivate from
it looks bad.
the cave walls and the bats. So it's actually not a fast grower. You see, it hasn't filled the plate.
Because that's been in there the same amount of time? Or?
Oh yes, yeah.
And those are those started off as two different individuals there?
Yes, I put 2 plugs in this for this one. Because it doesn't grow so well, I like to have 2 cultures instead of just the one.
Well, this one seems a lot more complex. It's different colors, different textures. There's different things going on there. Well,
actually, this particular species produces liquid chemical. On the surface. This culture, it's dried up a little now, so you can't see it. There's the little drops, sort of circles. That's where it used to be. Now it's dried up. But yeah, you do have these different colors. It starts out as white. Like you think white nose fungus is going to be a white fungus in culture. And initially it is when it's very young, but it quickly turns to this sort of gray.
Right.
Oh, it's made up of a whole variety of chemicals. Magnesium, yeast agar. There's some sugar in there.
Okay.
They like that.
And
some iron.
It gives it everything it needs to grow.
Exactly. Of course, different fungi have different nutrition requirements.
How prevalent is that in a cave? Then do you see it all over the walls of a cave if it's present in the cave?
You don't actually visibly see it on the walls, but in terms of culturing, I've gotten it from 40% of my samples.
Okay.
Viable fungus, yeah.
And are you getting that off a bat that is infected with it, or are you getting it off the walls of the cave or the floor of the cave? Or
I haven't tried the floor myself, but other researchers in the U.S. have done the floor, and they also get it.
But in the cave, you'd have it with all those other fungi as well, so you wouldn't get it as large and concentrated.
Well, the thing is, I've found over 100 species of fungi on bats, but only this one seems to grow on them. The other ones are just a spore.
Right.
That's resting on the bat that's caught in its fur somehow.
Yeah.
It's picked up from the environment.
And is maybe catching a ride to another cave where it will propagate there or something like that.
Yeah. So for a lot of fungi, bats aren't its natural substrate where it grows. Like some of the fungi we found in caves, you usually find on green plants. And there's no green plants in caves, right?
No.
So it's obviously not where they usually live.
Okay, so this is the fungi that causes white nose syndrome and that kills all the bats. What do you do when you find a dead bat?
So we pick them up and bring them back here to the museum. We've got several dead bats downstairs in the lab right now.
Can we go see them?
Let's go.
This looks interesting. Karen, we were upstairs looking at all the fungal cultures that you've got growing. What's going on here? These are the bats themselves, are they?
Yes, these are a whole bunch of dead bats we collected. Actually, we have a huge sample size from Ontario pre-white nose, so in 2006 or so. They were all submitted for rabies testing. We got them here at the museum, and we're part of a genetic study, so we're looking at the bats before white nose hit and after white nose hit, and see if there's any difference. She's going to be preparing the skin so that it's preserved in the museum for a very long time. And she's also taking muscle tissue for the genetic study. The bats we took post-white nose, we found those dead in the cave. We collected them opportunistically. So we found them mostly on the floor of the cave.
You said that this research here, this genetic research, you're participating in it. That's the New Brunswick Museum is participating in it. Is this with other museums or universities in Canada or elsewhere? It's all part of the white nose investigation, is it?
Oh yeah, this is a huge project. It's being done by a postdoc. She's affiliated with museums and universities across Canada. She has samples from British Columbia. That's really going to be a cross-Canada picture of the genetics of the little brown bat.
Has white nose crossed Canada as well? The white nose?
No, not at all. It's as far north and west as Thunder Bay, but it has not yet been found in Manitoba. It has been found just south of Manitoba, in those states, but not yet.
I was wondering if there's anything about the plains, the prairies that will stop it from spreading across there. I don't know if the bats there hibernate in caves.
They do, but actually there are no known hibernacula in Saskatchewan. No caves or anything. There's actually quite a few, relatively speaking, for Canada in Manitoba, but not Saskatchewan. And a little brown bat is capable of flying across Saskatchewan anyway, because they can fly hundreds of kilometers. Humans may have spread the fungus from cave to cave by not properly decontaminating their gear. That's definitely something everyone should be aware of if they're going into caves. You do not want to disturb the hibernating bats, but if you're going in for scientific purposes, you really need to decontaminate your gear before going into any other cave.
We were in a cave earlier today, and it's interesting, but some people do a lot more of it than I ever have. Do people like that generally realize the risks of spreading this around and take precautions, do you think? Or is there information out there to people to ask that they do their best not to transmit these things?
This issue has gotten a lot of media coverage, but no, I don't think everyone is yet aware of this issue and the risks they take when they're caving like this. Hopefully that message gets out there to more and more people. Certainly all the major caving groups across Canada are aware of this issue, and I hope are taking these precautions.
Spreading the information amongst their members, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
This looks like very detailed work you're doing here. You're basically taking the skin off the bat, are you?
Yeah, so she's separating the skin entirely from the body. So the body will actually be placed into our bug barn, so all the flesh is going to be removed by the beetles and we'll just keep the bones. And the skin will be pinned out like this. There are still some bones actually in the wing here and the foot. Those are too small. We can't really remove those. But the rest of them are going to be in a little box right by the skin.
So is that natural oil from the bat, or is that something to do with the preservation here? No, that's
from the bat. They're actually quite fatty, these guys. The corn flour actually absorbs a lot of that.
Okay. That's what we
use it for.
Corn flour going onto there to absorb the fat. And how many of these bats do you have? Do you have to turn into specimens like this?
So there's about 7,000.
7,000.
Yeah. I don't expect that we'll get them done right away. It takes a while to do each one. It's amazing actually the time it takes just to set everything up and get all the measurements you require. And a lot of these have been in the freezer so long they can be difficult to separate from the skin.
And this is all part of a basic research project that is continent-wide, really, looking at this white nose syndrome amongst the bats.
Yes, yeah, we're happy to participate in those sorts of projects.
Well, that's good. Well, it's been a really interesting day here, going into the caves and seeing the results of what comes out of the cave, both the fungus and the bats themselves here. It's kind of an unfortunate story as far as the bats go. But it's interesting to see the basic research that goes on here.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for showing us around today.
That was my pleasure.
The Wildlife Trust Fund has been supporting this project since its inception, since prior to the arrival of white nose here. It's been very important for us in helping us leverage funding from other sources.
you don't get all your money from one place for these kinds of projects these days, so it's helped us leverage money from both in Canada and also in the U.S. We've had some funding from the U.S. from a number of federal agencies like Parks Canada. We've had good support from the Environmental Trust Fund. The National Speleological Society in the U.S. has provided us with funding, and really it would have been very difficult, I think, to have leveraged that funding without the support from the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund. So these are some of the species of bats that are most heavily affected by white nose in this area. The little brown bat. Yeah, this is a very common, widespread small mammal in the region. And the long-eared bat looks very similar, unless you're familiar with bats. We have probably a couple of years that we'd like to continue this work. Right now we're tracking bat populations. They haven't quite bottomed out yet, but we expect that within the next year things will bottom out, which means that either there will be no bats left or there may be small numbers persisting. What we'd like to do then is continue to track things for a little while to see whether there's any, if there are any left, if there's any increase in bat numbers. We're continuing also to work with some of these fungal collections. There's a lot of work involved in identifying these fungi, and that can take actually quite a bit of time after the fungi have been collected in the caves and cultured. It can take sometimes a year or more to make the identification, so we'll continue to do that work over the next couple of years. The fungus itself is here to stay. There's no doubt about that. The hope is that there will be some portion of the population, looks like it's going to be a very small portion, that will have natural immunity to this disease, and that the population will eventually recover to some degree. It will take a very, very long time, but the hope is that there will be some natural immunity in the population. So far, there's no sign of that, but we're still keeping our fingers crossed.
Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about white nose syndrome and the serious threat it's posing to the very survival of New Brunswick's bats. Only time will tell if the remaining bats are strong enough, healthy enough, and genetically diverse enough to allow them to rebound from this trauma. I'm Don McPhail, and thanks for watching.